I'm Tiffany, and this is Towering TBR. So, November is finished. I have already wrapped up my first half of my month, so go to that if you haven't already checked it out. So these are the 10 books I read or DNF'd in the latter half of November. So I'm going to start with the DNFs first. I have 4, so yeah. The first is No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. And this was a book club pick. I would have never picked it up on my own. But the main character is exploring what it means to be human. And I only read about 60 pages. But he just kept saying he couldn't identify with humans. He couldn't be around humans. But then he would be around prostitutes, and they didn't count as human or were subhuman. And that kind of gave me incel vibes. And I immediately decided I didn't want to read the rest of the story. Like, he was just a very unlikable protagonist. And yeah, it was just not for me. The next book I DNF'd was Easy Beauty by Chloe Cooper Jones. I'm not saying this is a bad book, but this is not a book for me. I heard it was a disability memoir, and I was excited about that. But she immediately starts talking about art and philosophy, which are 2 subjects that I'm not interested in. And yeah, I just didn't want to keep reading, so unfortunately, I DNF'd that one. The third was the Pinball graphic nonfiction by Jon Chad. I read about 40 pages of it and realized I just don't care that much about pinball. Like, it starts off strong with talking about how pinball was actually a game even before, like, the video games were made, and that there was a big controversy between skill or luck, and if it's luck, then that falls under gambling. And there was a picture that I'm going to put up in post because it was really funny that these people were like out to get pinball establishments. And yeah, I thought that was really funny, but it also just was too serious for me. Like, I am just not that demographic for a really niche book. But I mean, if it sounds interesting to you, go ahead and pick it up. And the last book I DNF'd, and I could go back to it, which I don't often do, but this is a possible one, was Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe. And I like his writing style, but this one is focusing on the Sackler family who owned Purdue, which manufactured OxyContin, and they have been kind of blamed with the opioid epidemic. But he starts the book off by going into the background of all of these people and their brothers and everyone. And the first brother, he's the one that decides to start branding medications. Like, before that, it was just, you just get whatever the chemicals are that you need, and they didn't have brands. But yeah, he invented like pharmaceutical branding and like salespeople with doctors, and he just sounded like a terrible person, and it was just a miserable read, and I wasn't in the right headspace for it. So I may come back to it, I may not. It was just infuriating. So anyway, and my cats are fighting, which is why the camera's wiggling. Cats, stop. Okay. So I read 2 5-star books in the second half, and I will, sorry about that. And I will talk about them at the end. We'll build up. So, I mentioned in my December TBR that my husband and I are going to be listening to the audio book for the Fellowship of the Ring. Well, we got to the Hobbit this month, and so I was able to finish this, and I liked it, but not that much. I gave it 3 stars. It was very episodic and very adventurous, and the storytelling was fun. We listened to a really good audiobook narrated by Andy Serkis, and he does the voices, and he's just a talented narrator. And yeah, like, I liked listening to these stories, but I don't love it as much as everybody else, so that was a little bit of a bummer, but I'm hoping that once we get into the trilogy, it'll get better. So, finish that. I also finished Notes from a Sickbed by Tessa Brunton. She has ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, and this is her memoir of kind of searching for a diagnosis and working to put together this comic book with the very, very limited energy she has. There's one scene that I found really funny. Oh, okay. So she has so very little energy that she is mostly homebound, and she does a lot of resting on the couch. And when she's living in an apartment, she can hear the sounds of other people partying and living and socializing. And she says that she decides she's going to apply to be a ghost because she doesn't really feel like she's part of the living anymore. And she said, though I'm technically alive, 2 words I'd currently use to describe my lifestyle are open casket. So I just thought that part was really, really relatable and shows the kind of humor that she has. Which, yeah, like, this is an incredibly hard condition to live with, and for her to be able to find joy and poke fun at it, I think is really an indicator of her strength. There was another scene in here where she is not being able to accomplish very much, and she says, if I create my graphic novel 1 page at a time, how long is it going to take? And when she does the math, it turns out to be years, 19 years. And she just gets so devastated that she is just not really living. And I identified with that a lot as well. And however, why I'm only giving it 4 stars instead of 5 is it feels incomplete. Like, she has some random vignettes that are just kind of short snippets that we don't really get any context for. And yeah, unfortunately, like, I know as a Spoonie, like, this took her a lot of effort to create. And it feels harsh to say that it feels incomplete, but unfortunately it does. So I think this is a great graphic memoir, especially if you know somebody who's chronically ill. I mean, even if they don't have the same condition, there's a lot of overlap and they might really like it. So definitely would recommend this and gave it 4 stars. I also finished the graphic memoir Ducks by Kate Beaton. I had read Kate Beaton's comic Hark a Vagrant, and they were like comic strips for a newspaper, but like little historical events, except they were just really humorous. And yeah, so I kind of thought her memoir would be humorous as well, and that was wrong. This is a very grim, bleak memoir. She is born onto a small island in Canada, and basically there's no real industry there, so she has to go to the Alberta oil sands to make money. And she's doing this because she has college loans that she really wants to pay off. So this is a primarily men's dominant job field. It's dangerous work. It's really isolating. They have like little camps instead of like living in proper like cities. And the amount of misogyny and sexual harassment and even sexual assault, it took me days to read this book because this was just such a bad environment for her to be in. But because of poverty, she didn't really have like a lot of choices. And I really liked the artwork. I think she's a very skilled comic artist. But yeah, this was a hard memoir to read. I gave it 4 stars and enjoyed it. Sounds wrong, but I think it was a powerful memoir. I also, for Nonfiction November, picked up Undocumented Americans by Karla Corneo something. Sorry, I probably wouldn't pronounce it right anyhow. This was actually pretty short, about 5 hours on audiobook, and it was interesting. It's part investigative journalism and part memoir. Karla herself is an undocumented person living in the United States. She moved here as a child, and so she is now a recipient of DACA, which is Deferred Action Against Children Arrivals, I think. So because of that, she felt secure enough to publish under her own name. And I think that is really cool because she had access to interviews with other undocumented people who would probably feel like they could trust her more than just an outsider asking questions. I kind of wish it had been just investigative journalism because sometimes it felt like she shoehorned her story in a little bit, like it just was less natural. But this was really illuminating. She basically focuses on a couple of areas of what undocumented people face in the United States. She talks about 9/11, and at Ground Zero in New York City, a lot of undocumented people were there to help with the cleanup, with the rescue search, with all of that. And because they were undocumented, they got paid less than what is the legal minimum wage. And they didn't receive safety gear for being around toxic materials. And she talks about how difficult it is when crises happen because a lot of them are really afraid that they could be caught and sent back to an unsafe situation. And so she talks about the Flint, Michigan water crisis and talks about how a lot of people didn't know that the water had really high levels of lead in it because they sent the National Guard out to notify people, and they obviously didn't want to answer the door. She talks about how undocumented Americans don't have health insurance and how basically they use their bodies up to do the jobs that other people don't want to do, and then they're kind of broken and used up at the end. And yeah, it was really illuminating. It was interesting, and it gave me a lot of topics that I hadn't really thought of a lot in depth. I found it really quite fascinating. I wish it had been longer, actually, because she could have maybe covered a couple more subjects, but this was a really good book, and I gave it 4 stars. All right. Now we're down to my last 2, which are both 5 stars. I picked up Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. This book was written in the 1950s, and is nonfiction. So I was expecting it to be really quite dry and just, oh, here's this survival story. Yeah, I love shipwreck stories and survival stories, and this was just incredibly atmospheric. It's definitely narrative nonfiction. But the author weaves these facts together to really set a scene. He talks about the cold and the wet and not ever being able to have like a dry sleeping bag, and the chafing and the frostbite and the rancid food and the animal predators. Like, this was just, I don't think it could have been more entertaining if it had been fiction. Like, there were so many twists and turns, and like, their boat sunk in Antarctica. It was destroyed by the ice, and they lived on ice floes for like months. It was just incredibly exciting and definitely a new favorite. This is so good. And like, the fact that it's a real story, and like during these events in 1914, like the First World War was starting. They didn't know anything about it. They were so isolated. It was just, this was a really good story. I highly recommend it. And lastly, we're going to end up with a new favorite, and that's Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Tsujimura. I probably said that wrong. I'm really bad at pronouncing unknown names. But oh my gosh, this. So you know it's a 5-star because I've saved it to the end. Yes, this follows Kokoro, who is a Japanese junior high student who is no longer going to school because she is facing some bullying. And she's afraid of the bully at school, so she won't go. And one day her mirror lights up and she's able to step through it and find this castle. And at the castle are 6 other kids that have magically been pulled through their, like, stepped through their mirrors, and a little girl in a wolf mask. And she's kind of the boss of this castle. She kind of talks to them and explains that in this castle there is a key hidden, and if they find the key, they will get their wish fulfilled. And once that wish is fulfilled, the castle will go away. And so we follow her and see her use this castle as a way to avoid school, as a way to get away, and she slowly starts to get to know some of the other students. They all have some issues, and they use the castle as well to avoid those issues. And yeah, this, for the first 2/3 of the story, this is pretty slow. It's character drawn. We're getting snippets from all the characters' lives outside the castle and at the castle. And it's a really sweet, wholesome story about friendship. And then the last third happens. And that's what made this a 5-star. But unfortunately, that is a spoiler. In the last third, you kind of come to find out why the castle exists and kind of why these kids were chosen, and just different things. Unfortunately, like, I want to just tell you everything about it, but I don't want to spoil it. So I may do a spoilery wrap-up. If anyone's interested in that, let me know. But yes, this was amazing. This is a very strong, wholesome found family friendship book. And it is just magical. It is becoming an anime movie in Japan in December. And I am really, really hoping they will subtitle it in English and release it in the United States, because I cannot wait to watch it. Like, just love these characters so much. And yeah, It is a bit slow in the first part, so you gotta just keep that in mind. But the ending is amazing. So, 5 stars. I have been so lucky to read so many good books lately. Tell me, what did you read in the month of November? Any new favorites for you? All right, chat with me down in the comments. Bye.